Hearing will return to order. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Strickland.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. I represent Joint Base Lewis McChord, home to over 40,000 active duty service members and their families. JBLM is the Department of Defense's most important installation for projecting power into the Indo-Pacific region, hosting the Army's 1st Corps and 1/3 of the Air Force's entire C-17 fleet. I want to start by recognizing the Army's 250th birthday. I am an Army brat myself. My father served in the military. He joined the Army when it was segregated, and he continued to serve when President Truman desegregated, something that probably would have been defined as woke back then. I could not be more proud of the soldiers who make up the Army what it is. And as part of the celebration, the Pentagon is going to host a day-long festival and parade estimated to cost up to $45 million. Department of Defense officials have described this as a generational recruiting tool and a plan to highlight every era and legendary leaders throughout Army history. So, Secretary Hegseth, do you plan to include displays of Colin Powell, our first Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Will you include displays about the Japanese-American 442nd Regimental Combat Team, one of the most decorated units of all time? Will you include displays about Major General Charles Calvin Rogers, whose Medal of Honor your department previously labeled as DEI? Recent articles by Stars and Stripes, Military Times, and others outline how your team has gone to great lengths to wipe out references of these American heroes. I'm incredibly concerned and actually disappointed that you will continue trying to tell an incomplete story about the Army's proud history, especially when you consider that 40% of those who are serving who are enlisted represent minority communities. So I'm going to ask you, sir, will you be able to talk about these things and will they be included? And then I have another question after that. Go ahead.
Well, Congresswoman, I do not accept your insinuation that we would seek to disclude any race or group of people in representing 250 years of incredible service of the United States Army, including your father's, which I thank him for. We're proud that we're going to put on full display the Army's military might 250 years on, which is a demonstration of American freedom, power, and commitment.
And I agree. Are these three people that I mentioned going to be included in this celebration?
This is a parade demonstrating military might, capabilities through the years, including to today.
Yes, and there will be exhibits. So will these folks be included, sir?
Well, I think you'll be heartened to know that the Secretary of Defense is not involved in choosing individual exhibits in the celebration, but our team has put in a great deal of effort to make sure the Army's history is well represented. And I'll say this, as a part of the reason I'm sitting right here and I put on the uniform is a parade that went through my parents' hometown in Wanamingo, Minnesota. Blink and you miss it, nothing farm town.
Absolutely. Now, I'm talking about the exhibition, sir.
Made me
I'm talking about the exhibition. Are you going to include Colin Powell, the Japanese-American 442nd, or Major General Charles Calvin Rogers? That's my question.
I'm sure we will include a cross-section of a lot of incredible Americans and possibly all of them, too. I have no idea.
So you have no idea, or I'm going to take that as a no. All right, next question. Let's talk about Ukraine and Russia. So we know that Russia started this war. They have long been an adversary of the United States. And at the same time, you heard the president make some really interesting comments, not including Russia in the widespread random tariffs. So I think one question I will ask you as we talk about wanting peace, because we all agree that's a desired outcome, do you and the president support surrender to Russia by Ukraine as your definition of peace?
Ma'am, no one has talked about surrender. We're talking about a negotiated peace.
So does that mean that you're okay with Russia keeping this territory that they're trying to take so they can march on to one of our NATO allies?
Ma'am, I think the situation is unfortunate, unleashed by the previous administration. But everyone that talks about winning and prevailing has yet to present to me a plan that's going to push the Russian army out of those territories.
So, sir, I appreciate you talking about the previous administration often, but we are now in this administration. So as the person who serves at the pleasure of the U.S. president, do you believe that Russia is a true adversary, and is your definition of peace going to be surrender of Ukraine from this invasion?
Ma'am, I've never said surrender, and we're prepared to negotiate what we hope will be a lasting peace.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our distinguished witnesses, Ms. McDowell, Secretary Hegseth, and General Caine for your service and appearing before us today. Secretary Hegseth, I also want to thank you for visiting Guam, and it's great to see you once again, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate your keeping an eye on the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, sir, and wanting to make sure that our construction, our readiness projects on Guam stay on time and on budget. Considering the complexity of of working in our isolated territory, of course, with workforce constraints and logistical constraints as well, tell us about the mechanisms that you have in place to ensure we maintain our time and budget on the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, sir.
Well, thank you for the question, sir. It was great to visit you. I will say a big part of that is focus and attention and time, and I was struck, not to be critical of any of my predecessors in this context, but that it had been over 20 years since the Secretary of Defense had visited Guam. It was one of the first places we felt like we should go because our focus is in the Indo-Pacific, and the troops we have there, the capabilities we have there, the facilities we have there, the forward posture we want to maintain there, Guam being a central part of that. So seeing is understanding. We came back from that with an even better understanding of what that island and other parts of multiple island chains needed to consider deterring China. And then our group went right to work, responsive to many of the things we spoke about, but also to ensure that this budget funds those priorities. So indeed, the Pacific Deterrence Initiative is increased robustly through this budget, and then a lot of other ways in which Guam will be a part of the future fight.
I thank you, and I also ask for your continued support. Our main workforce there is the H-2B workers, which we'll be looking at to extend once again with your support. So thank you, Mr. Secretary. One thing that would be helpful for our contractors on Guam is regarding the design, bid, and build. So this makes a lot of delays and change orders and cost overruns due to our site locations and our logistical complexities. As the department, or I asked the department also to review some lessons learned from the design build versus design bid build models. Instead, that will really speed things up, and I'm hoping your budget will enable more flexibility for our contracting strategies to do just that.
One of the core pillars of how we're changing MilCon acquisitions is flexibility, with a recognition that each site, CONUS or OCONUS or more far-flung, has unique complexities, workforce complexities, logistical challenges, resourcing challenges that need to allow the local leadership there to adapt as quickly as possible. And the last thing the DoD usually does well, especially the bureaucracy, is adapt. So we're trying to give maximum flexibility and latitude, sir.
That will be extremely helpful. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And then General Caine, you know, with the transition to fully integrate Guam Defense System, GDS, how are we synchronizing the existing capabilities like THAAD and Aegis Ashore and the Golden Dome? Architect plans to ensure seamless integration with global missile warning and reconnaissance systems.
Well, sir, thanks for the question, and thanks also for your service in the Army previously. You know, the importance of integrating our defense capabilities is critical, and as we look at systems like that and Aegis Ashore, you know, the department is looking carefully at what has to be true to make sure that the other systems like GDA are able to bring forward a layered defense system from sensing layer all the way through the kinetic layer to ensure that we don't have any gaps. And so that's something I know the team that is running GDA, the team that's running THAAD and Aegis are doing, sir, down in the services.
Thank you. And I think a lot of research will be done for the island of Guam to make sure this is right to protect our nation and our island at such a forward proximity. And then this lessons learned from that will help our nation build on the Golden Dome. Would that be a correct statement?
Sir, I think, our goal is to share lessons from not only your home, but the other places that GDI and Golden Dome will be a part of. And so they do accelerate our learning, sir.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hegseth, Chairman Caine, thank you both for being here today. Mr. Secretary, your testimony over the last several days before Congress, I've heard you speak about all of your supposed accomplishments from your time at the Pentagon. I have to say, your training at Fox News has let you spin months of dangerous dysfunction and incompetence into catchy phrases like restoring the warrior ethos and increasing lethality. But the truth is, it's really been chaos at the Pentagon under your leadership. You've clearly shown you're unable to manage the Department of Defense, but what I'm most concerned about are three specific areas: your operational incompetence, your managerial incompetence, and your budgetary incompetence. So let's start with operational. According to news reports, in your first week on the job, you got confused in a National Security Council meeting and thought President Trump wanted you to stop all aid to Ukraine. In a well-functioning administration, you would have asked for clarification before making that seismic policy shift, but instead you ordered vital military aid heading to the front lines turned around, costing the U.S. millions of dollars, and depriving Ukrainian soldiers of equipment they needed to fight Russia. So, Mr. Secretary, can you explain how exactly you misunderstood such a monumental presidential order?
One of many fake news headlines we've dealt with.
So President Trump told you to halt military aid to Ukraine on January 30th?
As is often the case, highly ideological and very ill-informed reporters love to speculate about things they know nothing about in order to spear President Trump and myself.
So it sounds like actually the reporting is correct, because I will say, if it wasn't a mistake, why did aid restart only a few days later?
Again, we would take complete issue with what would some call reporting and others call a hatchet job.
So why did aid start just a couple days later?
I'm saying the reporting is inaccurate, ma'am.
I don't think that's correct. So let's move on to your managerial incompetence. I think we can see why you misunderstood the president, because you're obviously misunderstanding my questions. Less than a month into the job, you fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, C.Q. Brown, and the chief of naval operations, Lisa Franchetti, without cause. And to this day, you still have not provided an adequate explanation for removing them. As far as I can tell, you fired C.Q. Brown because he was black, and Lisa Franchetti because she is a woman. So nearly 4 months later, we still don't have a new nominee for Chief of Naval Operations. News reports, and you can contest it, but I'd love to hear your answer, say that you haven't nominated someone because qualified admirals keep turning the position down. So tell me, Mr. Secretary, when will Congress receive your nomination for the next chairman of the next Chief of Naval Operations?
Ma'am, with all due respect, I would suggest not believing every headline you read.
With all due respect, I'd like your nomination. When will we see it?
There has not a single admiral or any military official has turned down a position that's been
So when will we
provided.
see your nominee for the Chief of Naval Operations?
In due time, for all the right reasons.
Again, I think we've seen the managerial incompetence. Okay, let's move on to budgetary incompetence. You missed the deadline to submit a draft defense budget to Congress, which makes it impossible for us to complete our work on the NDAA or appropriations, and makes it more likely you'll receive delays in funding you need for new acquisitions, programs, and other priorities. Additionally, you're blowing money on poorly conceived operations and vanity projects for President Trump. Retrofitting the Qatari jet to serve as Air Force One will cost about $400 million. The parade in D.C. this weekend will cost upwards of $40 million. Your bombing campaign in Yemen cost about $1 billion, and a week later they were having missile strikes in Israel. Your operations in L.A. will cost tens of millions of dollars, and you claim to be cutting costs at the Pentagon, but all I see are wasted dollars better spent addressing our most pressing threats like China. So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
Ma'am, I would just say your list left off securing the southern border.
So, Mr. Secretary, what priorities have you cut funding for to pay for these projects?
We make trade-offs every day, and I would imagine what we want to spend on is quite different than what the previous administration did.
Well, I think
We
the
made
American-
those changes quickly, and they're reflected in this budget, and we're very proud of them.
I think the American people can see why I'm so concerned about this incompetence. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary and the panel. Let me just go ahead and commend you on an amazing job that you've done, not only in highlighting the importance of the warfighter, but also guaranteeing that our recruitment and retention is at the highest levels that we've seen. This is due to good leadership, not managerial problems, as one of my colleagues just tried to reiterate, and will note for the record is walking away because they know they don't want to hear the actual facts and truth. I'm going to go through a couple of things. They keep bringing up this plane, this aircraft. Well, let's go through history. This has been a long-standing cultural share, as aviation was one of the most remarkable things that man had innovated. And in 1945, President FDR actually gifted a Douglas DC-3 to King Abdulaziz, which marked the beginning of civil aviation in Saudi Arabia. The airplane is nothing more than a reason to complain about the president advancing U.S. interests, and this is more to conflate optics than actual outcomes. But we'll let them go ahead and spend their wills on a $400 million upgrade, not realizing the total cost of an aircraft. I think that's a cost savings, a good negotiation. Now, they talked about the Golden Dome. There's a lot of things that's intentionally left off operationally and classified to ensure that we can keep the sovereignty and protection of our nation without our adversaries actually knowing it. Our colleagues know this, but they want to try and highlight it in a way that brings about that you're trying to hide or not be transparent, as opposed to operational and communication security. But what they should be realizing is that there's a real violation of the 1962 Outer Space Treaty. That when the leak was made about Sputnik 2's capabilities and what Russia was trying to do to arm and weaponize from a nuclear capability in space, that maybe we should take a vital interest in not just what we're seeing here on Earth, but what we're seeing abroad as well. The president knew this in the first administration, which is why he created Space Force. I'll also go ahead and talk about DEI. Our recruitment and retention is high because we're no longer factoring diversity, equity, inclusion. We're focused on increased lethality, readiness, and being properly equipped. The warfighter ethos that he claimed was so intact. If it was intact, we wouldn't lower our standards. And our standards aren't arbitrary. The standards that you are setting for our armed forces are based on real military and combat needs that we have seen and evaluated, and usually lessons that are left from bloodshed and loss of life that we then base our standards upon to guarantee that we have the best, strongest, and most prepared warfighters and the greatest voluntary force in the world. With program procurement reform, I love the fact that you're going after the ideas that it's not about trying to have the most expensive at 100%, but what actually functions, works, and saves cost effectiveness and readiness, and having it on the table for our warfighter now, not in 5 years from now. So again, a great achievement. When we talk about recruitment and retention, one of the things I wanted to bring up, and I hope that you'll address, is those who are, in my opinion, unconstitutionally purged from our military for actually having their medical and religious rights denied. And I would like to see these individuals who are wrongfully purged given the opportunity to not only return to serve in our armed forces and our nation, not a political agenda, but to also have the ability to be re-incentivized by having back pay, full benefits, and being able to be returned to the ranks that they deserve without it being politicized. You know, I think that we should start naming a lot of our cities in Texas and in New Mexico and Arizona something that was by a Ukrainian city. Then our other colleagues might actually care about the protection of our borders. This is one thing that you've actually done great by sending our military down there, and we have a 600% increase in apprehension rates and a complete decrease in human and sex trafficking and fentanyl and opioids that are killing Americans by the thousands. Now, when it comes to the cartels, the president has designated our cartels, rightfully so, as a foreign terrorist organization. What can Congress provide to DOD in order to better support the mission, the physical security of service members in the southern border, and is there a possibility of maybe a Title 55, Title 11, Title 10 combination that will allow us to be able to work with DOD and the IC to be able to start going after those cartels?
Well, I appreciate those comments, sir. And as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't really an authorities issue when it came to securing the southern border. The previous administration claimed they needed new policies. No, we needed a new president who was serious about it, and so we have focused on it. rightly designating those criminal cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Right now, we believe we have those authorities. If necessary, we would come to Congress for additional ones.
Thank you so much. And again, I want to commend you as well on the operations against the Houthis. The previous administration had delisted as a terrorist organization, which was disrupting 12% of global trade, in addition to the Bidenflation that was sinking the middle class. So thank you for what you're doing. We stand by to support you. I'm going to support you from day one, as I always have. Keep fighting, and let's go ahead and go after the war fighters. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for being here. We have all worn the uniform. We've all served in combat. We all love our country. We all revere our troops. And I really want to speak with you both, not as partisans, but as patriots. And I want to talk specifically about the events at Fort Bragg the other day. General Caine, I want to start with you. As a junior officer, were you ever required to make a pledge of political loyalty? Yes or no?
Sir, as you know, we're an apolitical military, so, no.
Thank you. At any time in your 30-plus years of incredibly distinguished service, did you have to make a pledge of partisan or political loyalty?
No, sir.
Thank you. Did you ever serve in any unit or command at any level where service members were required to make a pledge of political loyalty?
No, sir.
Thank you. And I want to commend you. You've been on the record on this, including in your confirmation hearings, where you clarified, quote, "I've never worn any political merchandise or said anything to that effect." I appreciate that. That is the standard, and commend you for saying so and continuing to model that. General Caine, one last question for you. Should soldiers have to pledge political loyalty to participate in an event with our commander-in-chief? Yes or no, please?
Sir, I'm not, first, no. I'm not aware of any time in history that soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines have been asked to do that. I think,
I'm sorry, General, I do want to, just in the interest of time, I want to talk about what happened at Fort Bragg 2 days ago. There was guidance put out, and this has been verified by multiple independent news outlets, saying, quote, these are to the soldiers of the 18th Airborne Corps and the U.S. Army. If soldiers have political views that are in opposition to the current administration, then they need to speak with their leadership and get swapped out. This is swapped out of the event with the president. In addition, in an incredibly disturbing incident, there was a pop-up shop selling MAGA merchandise on post at Fort Bragg. And to summarize this, there was a commander from Bragg who said on the record, quote, "This has been a bad week for the Army, for anyone who cares about us being a neutral institution. This was shameful." If those are the facts, and I know the Army is investigating at least the MAGA pop-up shop, is that appropriate, General Caine?
Sir, I haven't seen any of these reports. I'm not familiar with them, but as I mentioned earlier and in my confirmation hearing, the nation demands a apolitical, nonpartisan military.
I appreciate you saying that and happy to share those reports. Secretary Hegseth, are you familiar with DoD Directive 1344.10? Political activities of the members of the armed forces?
Well, first off, I don't buy into your
yes or no?
insinuation
Are you familiar
that pledges are being done under this administration. That's
I reclaim my
insinuation.
time. Are you familiar with this DoD directive?
There's never one time in my service or in this
Mr.
Defense
Secretary,
Department.
will you please answer
I'm answering your
these
question
questions?
where politics has been considered for service members.
Are you familiar with this directive? Yes or no?
Which directive?
DoD Directive 1344.10. I'm happy to provide you a copy. There's even a one-page red and green cheat sheet. Are you familiar with it? This is the same directive from when we were all in uniform.
I'm sure I am.
Has anything changed in that directive under your guidance, given what happened 2 days ago at Fort Bragg? Is there a new policy change that we're not aware of?
Again, I totally reject your insinuation.
Is there a policy change to DoD Directive 1344.10?
I know what you're attempting to insinuate, but there's
I'll
no
take that as a
policy
no.
change, and there is no policy.
Mr. Secretary, have you ever worn a MAGA hat in front of the troops?
I own plenty of MAGA hats, but I don't.
Have you ever worn one in front of the troops at an official event? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Do you think it's appropriate for the President of the United States to wear political merchandise, including a MAGA hat, at official events, including West Point commencement?
The Commander-in-Chief
Yes or no?
can wear whatever hat he wants, to include the phrase, "Make America Great Again," because I would like to make America great again as well.
So you think that's appropriate?
The Commander-in-Chief has the right, in front of his troops, to wear whatever he'd like.
Okay, I strongly disagree with you. And I urge you both, especially you, General Caine, as we see an increasingly political rhetoric, including from the Secretary, to please, for the good of our troops, this is an incredibly difficult moment, and we need leaders like you to continue to echo the apolitical nature. I have 12 seconds. Mr. Secretary, I don't say this lightly. I have to say this on the record. I think your tenure as Secretary of Defense has been shameful and weak, and you should resign. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Mr. Secretary, we'll have a little bit of time to talk about all that. General Caine, is it true or not true that in 1988 you were at Plattsburgh Air Force Base as an ROTC cadet?
Yes, sir. I think I was. Yeah.
You recognize the person you're addressing right now?
Yeah, I actually do. Yes, sir. Please don't tell anybody how we did out there.
We did. We were athletic officers in 1980.
Yes,
I believe you worked for me at the time.
I did, sir. I still do.
Kinda, yeah. And just for the record, there was a Commandant Award recognizing the best cadet of all 200, and they got that right because it was the man sitting in front of me, General Caine, who won that. So I got out as a captain, so you're winning. General Caine, I want to talk to you about the lessons learned in Ukraine and how important that is. I also sit on the Intelligence Committee, and how we can best detour in the Indo-Pacific, because that is of vital import. We don't want to get into a hot war with a peer adversary. And then if you could also just touch on the importance of innovation and acquisition reform.
Yes, sir. As I've talked about before, the entrepreneurial spirit out there in Europe is one that we've all learned from. And as we look at creating multiple simultaneous cognitive, fiscal, and physical dilemmas for our adversaries around the world, we have to take that same entrepreneurial spirit and bring it back here to our nation, both in our national and our defense industrial base. So the importance of mass scale, building a DIB and a national base that can provide the combat capability that our warfighters need at the tactical edge is something that both the Secretary and I, as well as the services, are very focused on.
Oh, thank you. And you're both a breath of fresh air. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to visit with you a little bit about recruiting first, and then I do want to talk about politics in the military. We have seen a recruiting bump, thank the Lord, over the last 3-4 years. It was a crisis, and if we didn't solve it, I don't know what we're going to do. So I would like to ask you, because I've asked each of the secretaries of each branch to really do a deep dive and come back to Congress and let us know, because I want to start with doubts and end uncertainties. Find out the reasons why the change, whatever they may be, because whatever we're doing right, we need to continue to do so we don't get in this situation. And if you all need some extra funding, if you have folks that are willing to come in, I would rather have a few more than a few less. And also want to talk about the fact that I think you are a breath of fresh air, not only the general, but yourself, because the first thing that you said to us was you are going to reintroduce warfighting and lethality and force projection into our military, and you specifically said that you did not want to see politics infest, because we had people up here in the last few years that were clearly like a Democratic general. I never want to see that again. I don't want to see a Republican general. I want to see American generals, and American generals only ever address us. And I thought it was a travesty, and I have a case in point. We have here, this individual was, I believe, a major in the Army, was exalted and venerated above all 2 million active and reservists by the DOD, the former DOD. Why? Was there any excellence that was done? Was there a life saved? Was there a computer program written by cyber? No, it was because this person was transsexual, and they had a political flag in uniform, and they were waving it. That was disgusting, not because there was a transsexual, because that was a political statement, and this person did nothing of excellence at all to be recognized. And instead, we should be venerating people like Gary Gordon and Randy Shugar, who gave their lives to save Mike Durant and won the Medal of Honor. That's the lethality. That's what will deter the Chinese, and that's what will deter our enemies. And I'd like to give you 1 minute and 13 seconds to expound on that and maybe answer Mr. Ryan. Thank you.
Well, amen, and you're exactly right. That's precisely what we want to return to and restore. And every accusation and insinuation that is politicizing is blatantly false, and they know it. Ultimately, there were ideologies and particular political perspectives being injected into our forces. Call it political correctness, call it DEI, call it CRT, call it what you want. They were being injected in. Our job has been to remove those political ideologies and go back to basics. High standards that are the same. We're not looking at race. We're not emphasizing your differences. We're focusing on our unity, which is the point of any formation. Every formation I've ever looked at, I didn't look at the race or background of the people in that formation. I wanted the most capable leader, squad leader, team leader across the spectrum, able to do the job, because when it hits the fan, that's what I need, and our enemies need to see that. And let me say something about the chairman. He is the most professional, apolitical military expert I've ever worked with, and our country is grateful, should be grateful, to have him at the helm, because they are in very steady, apolitical hands. And he does
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I understand that the border is a top priority for you and the Department of Defense. Well, it's also one of my top priorities in my border district. That's why I've introduced bipartisan legislation to stop fentanyl at the border, secure our ports of entry, hire more CBP personnel, and combat the cartels, areas that I'm sure we agree on. Now, DOD has spent more than $525 million from the defense budget on military operations on the border. You've done it by diverting over $1 billion from military modernization and quality of life programs like housing. And as such, I'm sure you're well informed as to what your warfighters are doing on our border and the characteristics of the border itself. Secretary Hegseth, do you know how many border miles there are in New Mexico?
Not the exact number of miles.
Can you give me a round figure?
Hundreds.
Okay, 180 miles. Can you tell me where the border wall starts and ends on this map of New Mexico?
I'm not properly oriented to your map, but I know that, unfortunately, because of the administration previous, they did not have the opportunity to finish the border wall.
Thank you,
let it rust
Secretary.
on the ground instead of
Thank you,
putting it up,
Secretary. And you have been to
defending
New
our border.
Mexico. Could you tell me where in New Mexico you've been to?
I've been to the border twice to look at once at our national defense area down there because I can't recall a time when a Secretary of Defense has gone down in the first 4 or 5 months of his tenure to the border to better understand.
Was that in an
the
urban
situation
area
there.
or in a rural area?
Both areas, traversed rural areas and urban
Okay,
areas.
so you must be
Some
familiar-
with walls, some without.
Secretary.
And if President Trump was
Secretary,
actually supported, we'd have a
thank
border
you,
wall.
Secretary. I reclaim my time. So the most remote part of New Mexico is called the Boot Heel. And I'm not sure that you spent any time in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. Mr. Secretary, I was raised on the border. I've lived there my whole life. I've worked alongside ranchers, farmers, landowners, wildlife biologists, and other stakeholders for over a decade. I headed a border security task force in my district before coming to Congress. I've traveled with Border Patrol on ATVs. I've hunted the border on horseback and hiked dozens of miles in the most remote stretches of the border in this region. Now, do you happen to know why there hasn't been a border wall built in the Boot Heel?
Well, based on what you just described, you should be a big fan of what our administration is
Well, Secretary, I'm asking why a border wall has not been built. Funds have been allocated for other parts of the border.
Here's what I know. Our commanders on the ground and others and our engineers would understand what goes where and why, and where there should be a border wall, there will be a border wall.
Okay,
it will be
Secretary-
funded through reconciliation.
Secretary, are you
President Trump
familiar with the
is gonna
Animas
deliver
Mountains,
on it.
with Alamo Hueco, with San Luis Mountains, with Guadalupe Pass or Long Canyon?
Again,
Critical border areas.
I'm aware that there are gaps in different places where walls are not as effective as other places, and I get that.
Thank
We're
you,
applying
Secretary.
infrastructure
I appreciate your answer
where it
on that.
makes the most sense, because
Thank
we're
you.
going to get 100% operational
Thank you,
control of the border.
Secretary. So you agree then that a border wall doesn't make sense for the entire country?
I think we need a border wall across our entire border.
Okay, so you should know then why it's almost physically impossible to build a border across the Animas Mountains and the terrain challenges that that poses and the billions of dollars. Do you know if there's roads on those mountains currently?
If we're going to spend money as a government,
Okay.
it should be
I'll take that as a no.
secure our southern
Well,
border.
the point I'm trying to make, Secretary, is that if this is so important to the military, and you as Secretary of the Department of Defense should know more about the border. Mr. Secretary, I urge you to skip the photo ops next time that you go to a port of entry and spend time on the ground in places like the Diamond Day Ranch.
I think you should ask the soldiers on the border whether they've been photo op visits or not, because I spent a lot
Secretary-
of time on the ground
Secretary,
with
are
the
you-
soldiers, getting an understanding of what
Secretary,
they're
I'm
facing,
gonna
what
ask
they're
you a
doing,
question
what
that-
their capabilities
Secretary,
are.
I reclaim
not
my
for a
time.
photo op.
Thank you.
As a
Secretary, I
Secretary of
reclaim
Defense
my
to
time.
understand what our
Chairman,
troops
may I
do
reclaim
and
my time?
why.
Gentleman
they
reclaims
do it.
his time.
Thank you. Secretary, do you know what a tethered aerostat system is?
I do.
Okay. Well, great. Then you know that this type of surveillance technology is superior to having thousands of troops sitting in trucks looking at an empty desert. I've requested funds for more tethered aerostat systems. We haven't had a response from your department. Are you familiar with ASTs?
What's an AST?
Well, it's an autonomous surveillance tower. They're equipped with these advanced cameras that have the capability to relay critical information to border agents on the ground. And this type of technology is badly needed on the boot heel. And it's a much better expenditure than a border wall is.
I've seen that. I've seen those towers in use.
Great. Well, these technologies have been described to me by both Border Patrol and CBP as force multipliers, allowing their personnel to focus on law enforcement efforts while leaving this mundane surveillance task to much more efficient and cost-effective technology, a much more efficient way to surveil that part of the border. Now, Mr. Secretary, I have serious concerns with your fundamental lack of knowledge about the U.S.-Mexico border, considering the billions of dollars that DOD is slated to spend on this mission, with little clarity to those of us who live there. I would encourage you to do some homework on my region and learn what will actually make our border more secure and more safe. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I think it's great that the Democrats are finally concerned about the border. It's fantastic. I hope more of them join that fight in the future. It's fantastic, especially after 4 years of allowing millions upon millions across the border without any concern until now. When we talk about politicizing the military, I find it also very laughable when, for the first time, if you were to wear a "Make the Military Accountable to the Mission Again" hat, would that be considered political?
I think in many ways that's one of our slogans.
Okay, exactly. Mission accomplishment. When I was a young Marine and an old Marine, we were always focused on the mission accomplishment. One of the greatest things you've done is brought us back to our focal point, the ethos of the warrior. Make America Great Again, also I disqualify as political. That's something that every politician should want to do, let alone any military or non-military person that lives in America. So I dismiss that as political. I'm glad that you brought the mission back to all services. As a matter of fact, when I was down at University of North Georgia and we challenged you to come down to one of the Elite Eight, I was really impressed. I've always made fun of the Army, no offense to my Army comrades, about their PT. They were bringing it. They made it scientific. They're mission-oriented. They are absolutely focused 100% in large part because of the new leadership of the military, which I'm really excited about. And I'm looking forward to getting you down there. One of the interesting things that happened recently is the activation of the National Guard in California. This had to be done because, quite frankly, California didn't take care of its own. We actually recently sponsored and wrote legislation that would make those states culpable for the finances that are spent on those National Guardsmen when the governor or the local magistrates don't do what's required to take control of their own problem that was created because of their lack of action. Do you think that's a good idea, or do you have a better idea for motivating people to do what's right instead of having the president step in?
I think what the president has done here is common sense. If a governor and a mayor will not protect federal law enforcement officers in the execution of their basic functions, then the military, whether it's the National Guard or the Marines, is constitutionally or through statute allowed to come in and provide that security. That's precisely what we've done. The president, unlike in 2020 in Minnesota, when Governor Walz allowed a precinct to burn down, President Trump said that will not happen. We will get in front of this. We will not allow this to cascade. We will protect our law enforcement. And he's provided that clarity and common sense, and we're proud to be on that mission.
I'm glad the president stepped in where local Democrats have not stepped up to the plate. One of the things I noticed in my recent experience as a veteran is I had to go down to the DEER's office in person, take a half a day off. Now, luckily, I have staff that can help me arrange those things, but I had to send in a form where my son, just to prove my son's still in college, instead of emailing it or faxing it or whatever we do in the modern technology, I do it at the DMV. I will hope that you and your leadership would help us as veterans make it a much more friendly 21st century experience. And I would hope that you would look at that just in your administration. I appreciate you very much. Finally, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about a little bit about Ukraine. One of the things I've said all along is the president's one of the most peaceful presidents there is. When they worry about invasions of foreign countries, this president has avoided war like no other president in modern history. He has actually been very good at foreign relations despite his lack of previous experience. Now he has a lot of, and he did the Abraham Accords. One of the things that I thought would be interesting when we talk about peace from strength, the United States and Europe combined have $50 trillion GDP. Russia has 2. We decimated them, we meaning the Ukrainian forces, with our support, decimated 50% of their armor and about 1 million casualties just based on the little bit they've given. Do you think, according to the Supreme Allied Commander who was testifying here before, that if we gave them wholesale support, we could end this war very quickly if Russia won't come to the table per President Trump's guidance?
There are multiple ways in which we could help affect the front line and negotiations, and the department is prepared to support what might be necessary to do so, but our overall message is, and there's been billions spent already, and there are presidential drawdown authorities that exist right now that are still going in support of Ukraine, but our encouragement is that our European allies continue to step up as well.
General Caine, what do you think about Ukraine? You got about 10 seconds, sorry.
Well, sir, I think, obviously the killings got to stop on both sides, and that's, as all of us, thank you for your service as a warfighter, know.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. DeLuzio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Caine, I want to start with commending what you've said here today to Mr. Ryan and others about the apolitical nature of our military. I know it's a set of values that any of us who've served understand, that the military respects deeply civilian control, and that certainly runs up through Secretary Hegseth and to the Commander-in-Chief, no matter which party happens to be in the White House. I think even a pretty powerful example of that is when we have the State of the Union, you and the other members of the Joint Chiefs typically don't applaud for the more partisan parts of any president's remarks. Briefly, tell us why that is even a norm we should care about, why the American people should care about that norm.
Well, sir, that's codified in the oath of office, our Constitution, and our commission. So it goes all the way back to the beginnings, and that's always been our tradition.
I think it's an important tradition. I think it's one that we should care about no matter which side of this dais we're on, Democrats or Republicans. I think we should demand and expect that our most senior military commanders understand that partisan loyalty doesn't matter. What matters is the oath to the Constitution that we all take here, that any of us who've worn the uniform have taken. And I want to just ask some questions about the kinds of, I think, difficult positions commanders are going to be placed in, given what I saw happen at Fort Bragg, the guidance that exists now already for the military. And I ask this of you because you are not just the president's principal military advisor, you're the senior officer in armed forces. If you or any other commander were ordered to attend a campaign rally, you would decline. Am I right?
Sir, per the Hatch Act, which we get briefs on every year, it outlines pretty clearly what you can and can't do when you're in active service. And so I completely trust and believe in the professionalism of the United States Armed Forces, as does the Secretary, we follow those guidelines.
And I agree with you. And my concern here is less that we're going to see bad decisions made by our troops or their commanders. I don't think it's the problem. I think the problem is they're going to be placed in really difficult positions by civilian leadership. And the Fort Bragg episode, to me, is one of those examples. And I'll talk about some of the things, and we've heard some of it brought up here today. And again, my questions are to help you, give you a chance to put out for the public what you expect of our senior military leaders. So some things that the president said in his remarks, referring to a political rival, the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles called them incompetent in front of the troops. Referring to Governor Walz, reference back to the debate between him and now Vice President J.D. Vance, saying that was a good debate. J.D. against this guy, remember how bad he was? He was one of the worst. I think he's running for president too. Can you believe it? But he's a radical left lunatic. That's a quote. Referencing the continued lie that he didn't lose the 2020 election, President Trump said, and I quote, "I was thinking about running because the election was rigged and stolen. We all know it," end quote. That's what the Commander-in-Chief is saying in an event with troops who are ordered to attend. And let me be clear. Presidents for a long time have always had the prerogative to compel the attendance of our troops to be there as the Commander-in-Chief. I get it. This is different to me. You heard discussion of the campaign merch being sold on the base. Another piece of this, and let's bring this up, invitations to the event went out from Donald Trump's campaign. had an invitation right there taking you to a place where you can contribute, to DonaldJTrump.com. And so my question, my concern is, of course, you and I don't think any commander would agree to attend a campaign rally, but you're brought to something that traditionally troops have attended, as they should with the commander-in-chief, but it turns into something that's a campaign rally. What should our commanders be doing when they're put in this position, General?
Well, sir, I hope you'll allow me to answer this. By even my engaging in answering this question, that is making my job involved in politics. And so while I appreciate the question, I think the chairman and the force should stay out of politics. And if I engage in this question and with deep respect and appreciation for your question, I don't think it's an appropriate question for me to answer.
General, that is, I agree with the way you're approaching this, and that's what we should expect of our leaders. In the 10 seconds or so I have left, I will tell you I'm very concerned for the position that you and other senior leaders are going to be placed in by this administration. I'd urge you as the President's principal military advisor to give him advice to knock it off. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, did you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States?
Yes, I did.
General, did you?
Yes, I did, sir.
Well, let's delve into that document. Article 2, Section 2, the President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and the militia of the several states. So when people are listening to the Commander-in-Chief, they are actually fulfilling their constitutional duty that they took an oath to defend and uphold the Constitution. And what these folks are saying is absolutely shameful, because when they are calling you incompetent, Mr. Secretary, guess who's listening? Our enemies. The people that are plotting as we sit in this comfortable room in an air-conditioned, beautiful space, they are plotting the deaths of us, Americans. And it is shameful, and I wish my colleagues would come back in here and apologize to you personally. Let's cover a couple other things here. When someone has gender dysphoria and they decide to mutilate their genitals and they're taking cross-sex hormones, they're out of pocket for about 3 years. How many countries is the DOD involved in right now? What? 50, 60, 80, 100, whatever it is, right? Okay, someone is going to get on a plane and leave their family and potentially leave their wife a widow or their husband a widower because somebody has decided to self-actualize. We're going to go forward and we're going to complete the mission because that's what we do. And a lot of my colleagues simply don't understand that, or they're trying to ignore it. Clear up a couple things. The former chief of naval operations was incompetent and gave the Red Sea to the Houthis. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff let so much DEI garbage fly around they almost destroyed the military. That's why they got fired. Okay, as far as standards, the standard is the minimum. That is the minimum level of performance that someone will reach, or they're not qualified for the job. The NFL does not have a standard for females. If you're a lady and you want to join the NFL, go try out for the team. How many women play in the NFL? Anybody? The answer is 0. Why is there an NBA and a WNBA? Why? Because they acknowledge biology. So we can have as many whiz-bang, high-tech things available, but at the end of the day, to win a war, you need someone to go in a room and beat someone to death with their hands. That's a fact. And all this other stuff is meaningless. The Chinese Communist Party does not care what your pronouns are. They care if they know we will be able to destroy them, crush them, and grind them into dust if they mess with the United States of America. Mr. Secretary, there's 5 soft truths. The first one is the people are more important than hardware. Do you concur?
I would concur with that and all of your previous statements.
Thank you, sir. General, do you concur that humans are more important than hardware?
I do, along with the other soft truths.
All right. Well, good on you. So here's an issue that I'm having right now. It doesn't matter how great our people are if they're not upholding this oath and understanding that the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, is the Commander-in-Chief, and that you are the Secretary of Defense, and that you are the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we've had a rash of incidents around bases that can only be described as insubordination. taking down the president's portrait, turning yours around, turning the vice president's pictures around, removing them from stations, covering them with flags. That's insubordination. And insubordination is a crime according to the United States, the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. So what I just need to hear from you, Mr. Secretary, and I commend you for your performance or what you did for Fort McCoy in my district. I need to hear from you that you are actively trying to find the people that are subverting the chain of command, and then you will deal with them in the appropriate manner.
Every place where we find incidents like that or others, they're immediately addressed.
Thank you. General Caine, do you think it would be a political act for someone to be held accountable for insubordination? If you did that as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, holding soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians?
Well, Congressman, of course, you'd have to have the context around that. Right. So I'd want to know more information, sir.
Okay. I want to commend you for your performance today and your restraint by not lashing out at some of the most disgraceful comments I have ever heard in my short tenure in Congress. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii, Mr. Kuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree. We've had many performances today, but what we'd like is some answers. Mr. Secretary, did you invite Elon Musk for a briefing on war plans with China to the Pentagon? Yes or no is simple.
There's been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around that situation, but we did invite Elon over to come talk to us generally, but there was no war plans being discussed.
Okay, so whose idea was it to invite him to the Pentagon for a briefing? You mentioned you served at the pleasure of the president. Was it the president's will to have him come and be briefed?
Well, as you know, at that time, Elon Musk was leading up DOGE efforts, and we've taken a great investment in DOGE at DOD, and so getting his input on how we make DOD more efficient makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, but don't you think it's a conflict of interest for the world's richest man? Many of the contracts that the DOD is engaged in, billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading DOGE, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gain access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you, personally?
On the regular basis,
the answer
I
is
meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
Well, I'm
otherwise.
sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it
reason,
actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights, would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles. If we
protest.
take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we
Fine.
have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the
So
pleasure.
if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a
At
representative.
a time when we have
Another.
more
We have
Marines and
standard
National
rules of
Guard in
engagement
Los
and they are
Angeles than
followed.
we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question, the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's
I think we
favorite
know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and
Chair.
that
I
when
yield
it's
back.
invoked in L.A., they were
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. McGuire, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. To all of our men and women who have served or are serving, your mission is important, and we would not have a country without you. Secretary Hegseth, I last saw you at Memorial Day. We really appreciate your remarks as we honored and remembered our fallen. Secretary Hegseth and General Caine, thank you both for being with us here today. General Caine, I'd like to say congratulations to you on your recent confirmation as Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. President Trump has put his trust and confidence in two great patriots to lead our men and women in uniform. To me, MAGA, Make America Great Again, means America first. And that's America first, or Make America Great Again for all Americans, regardless of race, religion, or creed. And your policies are working, and day by day, week by week, all Americans are safer at home and abroad. So we commend you for your efforts. If you had a basketball team and you hated your team, you probably wouldn't win any games. And so I love the emphasis, all of us love the emphasis on patriotism and love in our country. Secretary Hegseth, I'd like to also thank you for all that you've done to restore the Department of Defense's focus on lethality and the warrior ethos. You know, facts don't care about your feelings, and our enemies don't care about our social experiments. A quote from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, I hope I don't mess it up, but he said, quote, "Our job is to stick bayonets in the hearts of our enemies." And these social experiments detract from that mission. I get messages from my Navy SEAL brothers and other veterans all the time applauding the work that you're doing. The distractions of the last 4 years of the Biden administration are finally out of the Department of Defense. DEI, which to me is Marxist, and it stands for didn't earn it, or no longer takes precedence in our military. Merit is once again valued. We're no longer worrying about the gender dysphoria or woke books in our DoD schools and those policies that have been erasing women. Climate change is no longer the concern of the warfighter. And by the way, I'm looking forward to celebrating with you guys on Saturday 250 years of a story that must be told of the U.S. Army. I want to thank President Trump for restoring American history. I know you had to jump through some gymnastics to do it. By returning the names of our bases to many of us called home during our time in service. And thank you and President Trump for showing the United States and the world that we are a nation built on law and order by the Department's response in Los Angeles riots. Through your leadership and help of this committee, we will realize peace through strength and our warrior ethos. So Secretary Hegseth, Section 866 of the fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act directs the Department to submit a strategy to ensure that solid rocket motor programs of record are adequately supported by the domestic industrial base. Yet solid rocket motor production is critical to a variety of systems, like President Trump's Golden Dome we have been lacking. I would say, Mr. Secretary, what progress has the Department made in developing a solid rocket motor industrial base strategy?
Well, I would say in particular, in general, the defense industrial base is a focus of ours. The projectiles and other capabilities being a huge part of that, munitions, but particularly on solid rocket motor projection, I'd have to hand it to my colleague, Bryn, if she has it on that line item. But if it was a priority that this committee identified and that we identified, then you can count on with a 13% increase in this budget, it has been plus.
Well, we really appreciate that. By the way, in my district, Virginia's 5th congressional district, we applaud what you guys are doing to protect our country. We have a place called ATDM, Accelerated Training and Defense Manufacturing. As I toured the new Columbia submarine and the new Enterprise aircraft carrier, the Secretary of the Navy said the welders have the same level of training as a neurosurgeon, and we don't have enough of those guys, but they're doing that right there in my district, and if your schedule ever permit it to come visit, I'd love to tour that with you folks. And we appreciate all you're doing. So under President Trump's leadership, you said that recruitment is up in the Army, and I think you said all services up, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Awesome, I appreciate that. And maybe getting rid of these divisive ideologies and focus on more what unites us has something to do with that. Would you agree with that?
Very much so. It's the leadership from President Trump and the environment they're entering into, which is back to basics.
By the grace of God. And I would say morale amongst our enlisted service members and across our military is up. Would you guys agree with that?
I've seen that.
Yes, sir. The force is united against the problems that we have out there.
Well, we're lucky to have you. Thanks for all you're doing. If we could be of help, reach out anytime. God bless you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Davis.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today, and to General Caine. The radar just lit up. And at that point, we were in an hour-long fight, just trying to kill whatever we could. These were words of a pilot at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, speaking of a deployment that occurred on April the 13th, 2024 in the Middle East, where pilots shot down rockets, drones, heading to Israel from Iran. Another pilot said, "It was a deployment like we have never seen before." Mr. Secretary, I'm incredibly proud of the airmen at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. And I was glad to join the ACC commander at a decoration ceremony recognizing 31 of the airmen and what they accomplished, and they accomplished the mission on April the 13th. As you have highlighted the warrior ethos, lethality, and readiness, I cannot think of a better example than what we saw on April the 13th. There was not a lot of time, there was a lot of scrambling. They packed up, took those F-15s to the Middle East, and they got the job done. Seymour Johnson plays a key role in our national defense. It also is a location of the Air Task Force. We have one of our Air Task Force, which aims to generate more efficient, integrated, and deployable units. Mr. Secretary, the Air Force has conveyed a commitment of plans to bring back F-15Es with the 229 engines from Lakenheath. Meanwhile, we're working right here. I'm trying to prioritize operational and maintenance needs at the installation. We also have to come back and address the training needs. In your opening statement, you mentioned NGAD, the F-47. Could you please just briefly expand further in terms of your vision of NGAD and looking long-term at the potential of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base and others to deliver and ensure the nation's continued air superiority in face of growing global threats?
I'll take it briefly and then hand it to the chairman. I have met some of those men and women from April 13th, impressive Americans, some of the refuelers I've had a chance to talk to from that evening. We are investing in NGAD in a historic way, and the F-47, a lot of its capabilities obviously classified, but with a sixth-generation fighter of that type, it shows to our adversaries that we are prepared to project power in the future. And where those go and where they're stationed is an open question, but we're happy to take a look, and I'll hand it to the chairman.
And thanks for speaking with our airmen. Mr. Secretary.
Hey, sir. First, thanks for your service in the Air Force and in the Joint Force as well. You know, just piling on here, that particular day for the Air Force, not just was those Strike Eagle crews, but also the maintainers on the ground who were loading missiles up while there was engagements going on right over their heads. So extraordinary acts of bravery under fire out of your home district there.
Thank you so much. General Caine, thank you, too, for your service. In the opening statement, you shared that you were honored to serve alongside some of the most incredible warriors and civilians and their families. And you didn't stop there, and I appreciate it. You said, I always especially remember our fallen and their families who demonstrate true sacrifice, courage, and commitment to our families. Corporal Ryan Russell was a medic. The 2nd Battalion, Fort Bragg, was killed March the 5th, 2007 in Iraq. I talked to his mother. He was 20 years old, putting a face on this, 20 years old, killed with others about the same age. And she said the only thing she missed the most was his smile. But my question is, we have, for instance, we can't bring back those loved ones, but we have the honor and remember flag. Representative Kiggins, myself, if you could take a look at H.R. 1363, I would ask you to do so. And Mr. Secretary, I would simply ask, what else are we doing to honor our fallen?
We'll take a look at 1363. I will tell you, we initiated the first ever advisory board for Gold Star families at the Defense Department to follow through on their families as well and finding every way possible to recognize.
And I, too, heard your Memorial Day comments. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
We will yield, the gentleman yields back, his time has expired. We will now go to another North Carolinian, Mr. Harrigan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Hegseth and Chairman Caine. Thank you all for your testimony today. I'd like to first identify with my colleagues' comments from Wisconsin, but I'd like to take it a step further. I think you all are owed an apology. And although I really wish that all of my Democratic colleagues' comments were of the nature of my colleague from North Carolina just a minute ago, that is not what happened today. And all we saw was flagrant disrespect towards both of you, and that's not what this committee is about. We should be able to disagree without showing disrespect. We should be able to have discourse without sowing discord, and we should be able to question without using words that you can't take back, and that's not what happened today from the other side of this committee. We need to do a lot better than this. But I will say, gentlemen, that you handled those questions with humility and grace. And today, many of my Democratic colleagues have struck out. And it's the second day in a row that many of my Democratic colleagues have struck out. So with that, I've got a couple questions for you today. Mr. Secretary, I want to talk about Army Transformation Initiative. I want to thank you for the bold work that you have done to reshape our nation's Army. Purging our Department of Defense and our Army of legacy weapon systems, force structures, and contracting mechanisms that have not helped us win the last 30 years of war, are not relevant to helping us deter or defeat China, is something that this country desperately needed. It's something that American taxpayers desperately needed. It's something that our servicemen and servicewomen have desperately needed. What is your plan to iterate the Army Transformation Initiative across both our Navy and our Air Forces?
It's a great point. I want to first compliment Army Chief General George, as well as Army Secretary Driscoll, for their initiative out the gate to not waste any time in recognizing precisely what you said, that we need an Army structured and prepared to fight the wars of the future. We owe it to the service, we owe it to the American people. And they followed in large part a Marine Corps that led the way overall in those, as sometimes they do, often. But I recognize other services, the Navy and the Air Force, could do more in that regard as well. Different ships, you might say, to steer than an Army and how you effectuate that modernization or that shift. We think the hard choices we're making in platforms and capabilities in those services mirror the kind of hard choices we're making in the Army, and that's what we see as our job. In this moment right now, considering the threats we face, the world we live in, I'm going to spend, the capital I have to be happy to take the arrows of constituencies or districts, say, no, we're going to put forward what's best for the Army or the Marine Corps or the Navy or the Air Force, and we're going to make the tough calls. And that might create some consternation, and that's okay. But our job is to ensure our budget matches those capabilities. Army transformation is a great example, and we're going to look for it in other services too.
I very much look forward to seeing what you'll have the Navy and the Air Force do, and we'll be behind you 100% of the way. And Chairman Caine, a lot of talk today about the Golden Dome. I don't really fully appreciate some of my Democratic colleagues not knowing what that's about or knowing the threats behind why we have to have the Golden Dome. But I also believe that we have to have mini domes all across our country. As we've seen, we've had very low-cost, high-impact technology proliferate all around the world. And I think we need to look no further than what happened in Ukraine just 2 weeks ago, where you had a $100,000 investment by the Ukrainians scuttle over $7 billion worth of hardware by the Russians. I think that we have to look forward into the future and anticipate that we may face the exact same threats, maybe not against our military, but against our infrastructure, against our stadiums, against our city centers, and we need mini domes to protect this country against those threats. How are you all working that problem set?